Hello and welcome back to the Now We Know show, the show where we discuss a topic of interest and by the end we will have learnt something new and hopefully you will too. I'm Jack.
I'm Buzz and Zak's in the gallery.
Which means
we
have a special guest.
We do, who we will introduce momentarily. But first, let's deal with what are we doing in this episode. Well, we are going to find out, hopefully, all about British bats. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is ask the computer. Computer, what are bats?
According to Wikipedia, bats are mammals of the order Chiroptera. With their forelimbs adapted as wings, they are the only mammals capable of true and sustained flight. Bats are more agile in flight than most birds, flying with their very long spread-out digits covered with a thin membrane or patagium.
So that's what the computer thinks.
So that's what the computer thinks, and if that's correct, we can say goodbye to our special guest because we don't really need to know anything about that. So without further ado, let's introduce Sarah Downing, ecologist and bat surveyor, into the studio this evening.
Hi.
Very welcome and pleasure to have you here. And what we're hoping to discover, as I said, is all about British bats. But first of all, let's start off by asking you, Sarah, maybe you'd like to introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, I've been in ecology for about 13 years. I'm a full member of the Chartered Institute of Ecology and Environmental Management, and I've just got my Class 1 bat licence this year, but I've been surveying bats for pretty much most of the last 13 years.
I was going to ask how long you've been working with bats.
Like I said, I've been dealing with bats since I've been in ecology. One of the very first bat surveys I did was a car-based bat transect down in Somerset when I was with the Record Centre. I've done everything from radio tracking to roost assessments and emergence. And
I'm already getting questions because I don't know what a roost assessment or what do you say, radio tracking?
Yes, radio.
How do you radio track a bat?
Remote control bat.
Are they like a drone?
It's all done under licence because all British bats are fully protected under legislation, so you can't block an entrance to a roost or anywhere they use for resting. Even if the bat isn't present, it's still protected under law. You can't kill, injure or capture a bat or take it from the wild unless it's injured and you're going to care for it and release it. Then
we'll probably cover some of these questions and come back to them. So British bats.
Yes.
Well, let's start right from the top, shall we, Jack? Yes. How many species are there? What are we talking about?
Okay. Well, actually, I'm going to go right back. There's about 14,000 bat species in the world.
In the world, I was going to say, not in the UK. Surely.
Hang on, let me just
refer to your notes. We like the specialists who've brought their notes in with them. It means you've done your research as well.
Yeah. Anyway, they account for 20% of all mammal species.
Really, that much?
Yes.
20% is
it's like
a huge chunk.
Nearly a quarter.
Yeah. All the bats in the UK are microbats. So you've got megabats and microbats. Megabats include all the fruit bats, the flying foxes, and the sort of ones you usually see in the zoo.
Seen Indiana Jones movies.
Yes.
Yeah.
Megabat sounds like good.
Yeah, yes. Megabat.
Yes.
Yeah, I bet that's, if you're a megabat, you say, I'm a megabat. But we have microbats.
We have microbats in the UK, and we've got about 18 species.
Okay. You say about. Is that because
we've got 18 breeding. We've got one non-breeding species. Bless him, there's only one of him.
Oh, no, blimey.
He's hanging on. They thought he was extinct. It's greater mouse-eared bats. So they thought they were extinct. 1930s, 1960s. So for a while.
For quite some time. And then what somebody's actually come across
and then they found one on a hibernation check.
So if you're saying that they thought they were extinct back in the 60s, and then when did they find one?
Hang on.
Just roughly.
It was about 1990s, I think.
1990s. So if they thought they were extinct for such a period of time, it bodes the question of, obviously, they have to. Surely we can't have a bat from the 60s still being around in the 90s. I mean, how long is a bat's duration of life?
They usually live sort of well, they think about sort of 10 years in the wild.
Right.
But there's a serotine bat that was captured and ringed, and I think that was in Siberia or somewhere. And when they recaught it, and the tag's 40 years old, and it's still
It's the Russians.
it's
the Russians
it's still flying around. So
It's a mecha bat.
yes, they can live for quite a few.
Okay, so it's a possibility this bat was from that time period.
You do get.
Or is it? Or could it just be that the population is so low that if you've detected that one singular bat, to say that that particular bat species hanging on in the UK, could there still be other ones around that just simply haven't been detected?
I mean, possibly. My notes aren't working, so so if I get any facts wrong, I do apologise.
No
When
problem.
you say about microbats and megabats,
Yes.
what's the biggest microbat that we've got in this country?
Our biggest one is the noctule,
Okay.
which weight-wise is between sort of 20 and 40 grams, which is the equivalent of a large egg. So chicken
Okay,
egg,
yeah.
So we're talking chicken egg.
yeah.
Okay.
So yes, very light. And then our smallest is the pipistrelle, which weighs between 3 and 5 grams. So white
tiny.
weighs, that's the equivalent of somewhere between a 5p piece and a 20p piece
Blimey.
white-wise.
Is that for the whole body weight? It's
Yes.
just that.
Yeah.
Gosh, that's nothing. That's nothing.
Which makes handling them a bit fun.
Yeah, it's almost like an insect, isn't it? That small.
So you say there's how many? About 16 to 18? Did you say?
There's 18 breeding bats, and then we
Species.
get so species, not
Yeah.
and then we get vagrants in that sort of come in over from Europe, and that
What, do they get blown in or something in storms or? Or-
some of them
I
can.
can't quite imagine a bat coming across the North Sea or something.
Yeah.
Do they fly that kind of distance?
Some
It's
of
a
them,
good question.
yeah,
I
some of
don't know.
them
That's
do-
what we're here to find
yeah,
out.
some of them do.
I mean, do they migrate?
Yes, well, the British bats not so much, but over in Europe, yes, they are quite migratory.
What was they move to different areas because of winter and summer?
Yeah, depending on roost sites and hibernation.
Whereas in
foraging.
the UK, you're kind of probably stuck pretty much where you are. I mean, you can go to Scotland,
Um,
and go down for Devon for the summer, you know.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's
Go a
probably
bit
more-
round Torquay or something,
yeah,
you know.
probably more sort of fragmented habitat over here, so sort of lights on motorways can act as barriers to movement. They usually follow hedgerows and tree lines, so as we've lost hedgerows, it's limited.
Right, so they kind of remember their roots, is that what you're saying?
Well, they will be familiar with sort of the areas round where they're roosting.
So when you're talking about where they're roosting, what specific kind of environments are we talking about? Because, I mean, Jack, if I said to you, in your mind, picture a bat in its roost, what comes to mind?
Maybe like someone's loft or something, maybe something like that.
And
Or
what,
abandoned,
what are they doing?
hanging upside down.
Okay, so that's what I was trying to get at. So generally, most people would imagine that bats are either in a belfry or in a cave, hanging upside down.
Or a cave, yeah, that's a
Yeah,
good
okay,
point.
it's a good cave. So what's the reality of that?
Horseshoe bats are the only ones that actually hang upside down from their feet.
Oh wow! I thought
So
that was
cave
literally
roofs
just
and-
a bat thing, like for every bat.
Yeah, I mean, most people would just assume all bats hang upside down.
Yeah.
Well, they do hang upside down, but the horseshoes are the only ones that sort of hang free by their feet. All the others sort of hang sort of on the wall, sort of cling to the wall, so head
Right.
down, or from curtains.
But not
or
just
whatever,
literally from the middle of the ceiling.
No, they'll be on ridge beams.
Okay, so what if they haven't got belfries and houses to roost in? What would a bat's natural habitat be?
Natural habitat would be sort of hollows in trees, sort of woodpecker holes, cracks from sort of lightning splitting, where the tree's desiccated and the trunks moved and causes splitting.
Okay.
Lifted bark behind thick ivy stems.
Well, you describe them as their weight. I mean, what kind of size are we talking about for your average little bat?
Well, I've brought a bat in with
You've
me.
brought a bat, not a live one.
And not a live one.
I thought he was just sleeping.
I do have a possession license because it is actually illegal to keep a dead bat without
Right,
a possession
so
license,
you
because
are-
they are protected.
So, listeners, I can verify that Sarah's fully licensed to be
Yep.
showing us this bat.
Yes, so
It is.
I mean,
It's in a bag.
yes, I mean even
You asked a question about it earlier, didn't you?
What's his name?
he's not actually named. So if you want to name him,
We call
Call him Adam West. I
Adam
think.
West.
You can work that one out for yourself.
Themselves. It's a bit mean, maybe, but it's going to be called Adam the Bat. Okay.
yes. So,
So-
like I say, it's illegal to keep dead bats
Right.
or parts of, or whatever, unless you've got a possession license. So I
Okay.
do have the
Yeah.
possession license.
And what
And
bat? I mean, to describe to our listeners what it is. I mean, it's in a sealed bag, obviously. You can tell that you can see its wings folded up there. Oh, you're actually getting Adam
I'll
out.
get him out for you.
Adam's coming out. All right.
He's
Adam is free of the bag.
quite desiccated.
Yeah, we'll just let you
Yeah.
hand. He's tiny.
He is.
So which species of bat
This
is
is
this?
a Brandt's bat, so he's a myotis.
Okay, well he was, I should say.
Yes.
Was.
Well, technically still is. I hope this doesn't turn into our zombie one.
I would
Yeah.
say
Can we connect
he's
to,
about the length of my thumb, which, considering I've got small hands.
you've got small thumbs. I've got reasonable.
Can we connect Adam in the spirit world? Do you reckon?
Yeah, get Mickey
Some
back
of
in.
Mickey's techniques.
Yeah. Oh yeah, he's tiny. So I'm just trying to think of something that everybody would have in their house that might be a good idea of size. I suppose that would sit in a teaspoon, wouldn't it?
I would have,
Teaspoon or a dessert spoon. It would just sit in the bowl of a dessert spoon.
yeah.
It's very,
sort
very
of,
tiny.
Yeah.
Yeah.
About a table
Okay.
spoon, but he's sort of.
Where was he found?
He was actually road collision. He was hit by a car or a van or something.
Do you know what,
colleague found him next to the side of the road.
I
on a survey.
don't imagine bats flying that low.
Well, you wouldn't even know if you hit that, would you?
No.
It's so tiny. It's like
No, you'd think it's just a large moth.
yeah,
Maybe.
yeah.
That's quite low, and I mean, bouncing off an articulated truck maybe, because I mean, I've seen bats flying around of an evening, and they tend to be, they're over the top of your head, they're up at the tree level,
Yeah.
and things. But car, that's quite low.
Yeah.
I've had foraging bats sort of inches off the ground, sort of chasing insects. So,
Right. Thanks for introducing us to Adam,
Yes.
May he
And
rest in
that-
peace.
and that does give us a good. So as far as Adam the bat's concerned, is that a good example of most British species size?
Your average British bat.
Yeah, he's about sort of medium-sized, sort of.
So they are bigger than that, but
Yeah, I mean, alive he would have been about 13 grams.
okay, yeah.
Sort of the top sort of weight. But,
Okay, so we've spoken briefly about their environment, that they're living in buildings, living in caves. I mean, we don't really. We're in Bedfordshire, so I'm assuming that we don't have particularly any caves. I can think of a local disused train tunnel that I know has bats in it, so that would
Yes.
sort of act as a cave. But I can't think of many caves in Bedfordshire, can you? So are we just talking literally the bat population in Bedfordshire, for example, would predominantly be within buildings and trees? Buildings and trees.
Yeah, and you'll find them under road bridges.
So do they
between-
just need the tiniest of crack to get into it then?
Things like pipistrelles, which are crevice dwellers, they only need an 8mm gap to get into, and on
Crikey.
buildings,
That is really, it's really small.
yeah, and they're,
So literally they can get underneath roof tiles then easily.
yeah, they tend to roost between sort of the roof tile and the felt lining.
Mm-hmm.
Which I guess kind of acts as like when you say a crack in the tree, I guess it's kind of a similar
Yeah,
kind of
it's
thing with the tile and
similar. Things like brown long-eared, they tend to like the roof voids, same as natterers, and so they're the ones that usually you'll find sort of hanging along the ridge beam in the loft.
Yeah.
So question, why, the way you've described it, why do bats as mammals, why do they choose to be up in a tree or up in the roof of a building? And why is it up? And why don't they roost lower down? I don't know. Is that a thing? Is that a question?
Under a bush or something.
Well, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, is there a specific reason, for example, that bats hang upside down or rest upside down or anything like that?
Not that I'm aware of. I don't think anyone's actually figured out why they hang upside down.
I mean, I'm just coming off the bat here, but I was just thinking that you can't. Nice one. I was just thinking that if you can imagine a bat. I mean, bats are a flying mammal, not a bird. But birds sit on a perch upright and take off. But bats, I can't imagine a bat standing upright.
Usually, when
Yeah.
bats leave a roost, they drop out first because the gravity gives them the speed they need to then take off.
Okay.
So, if
Trial
you
by
find-
fire.
Yeah, if you find a grounded bat, it usually can't fly because it can't,
What?
can't
It
lift
didn't get
itself
up,
up.
yeah.
Is it because it's old or it's just young and
No,
learning
I
to
mean,
fly? Or?
once they're on the ground.
Oh, once they're on the ground,
they're a
they're
bit
stuffed.
Yeah, well, unless they've got something they can climb up.
Right, to drop again.
Yeah, I mean, if they're roosting lower down,
Right,
I mean,
so
some roosts.
It would be fair to say that therefore, what I mentioned about the height, maybe it's that incorporated with the fact of that's enabling them to
Yeah, if you're low to the ground, you've got no chance of really
no
getting-
chance of flying. You go, yay, dunk, oh damn.
I mean, I've had brown long-eared roosts in trees that have been sort of about eye height.
Okay.
So they don't need a lot of height
they
to
don't-
drop.
No, usually if you're putting up a bat box, the guidelines are usually sort of 3 meters
Right.
off the ground, so it's sort of level, sort of first story.
Okay, so
unviews and
our
first
bat
story
boxes, if you mentioned bat boxes, of course, straight away my mind goes to bird boxes. Everybody puts bird boxes up. So a bat box is a thing. Is that something that anybody can put up, or is that something that, again, you need to specialise in bats to put bat boxes up? Would it be a wrong thing to put a bat box up?
No, anyone can put a bat box up. I would recommend sort of like the Kent style bat boxes where the
Which
slit is
are-
underneath the
Right.
box.
So
rather-
again, we talked about them flying away. So sort of returning to their roost must be a lot easier.
Again, it depends on the bat species because things like horseshoes, they like to fly straight into the roost and to where they're going to be roosting.
Right.
Things like pipistrelles will land and then crawl into the roost.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, the Kent bat boxes usually have a sort of a wooden bit that extends under the openings that they can land on and crawl up into the box.
Right.
But with the Kent bat boxes, because the slit is at the bottom, they're self-cleaning, so you don't need a license to clean it.
So the droppings
So
will
just
fall
have
out.
all the droppings fall out, so they're probably the best ones to get.
How many is it? I want to say bat babies, but I don't know if that's the right term.
Well, no, that's funny. I've got that question down.
Well, how many?
You can answer.
Okay.
Ask your question, but add to your question. What is a bat baby called? All right.
Okay.
So go for it.
So what's a bat baby called?
A baby bat is called a pup, and
Okay.
they usually have sort of one pup a year. Sometimes.
Oh, okay. So it's not like a
twins.
litter of pups. It's,
No,
Okay.
because I think the reason that they only have one is because they need to get to sort of almost their adult size before they can fly.
Yeah.
So the mum's sort of feeding them the whole time, and because they need calcium to sort of grow bones and
Yeah.
things, that actually is supplied by the mum from her own calcium stores because the food they eat is quite low on calcium.
Oh, I
So
see.
because
yeah.
they're mammals, does that mean that they have milk?
Yes.
Right,
Yes.
okay,
yes,
so
bat milk.
Yeah.
Bat milk. And your baby bats, pups, are having the milk. So therefore, that's telling me that the pups stay in the roost.
Yes, there are some bat species in other parts of the world that do carry them when they
That was going to be
fly.
another question. Do they actually fly with their
They do.
baby bats?
The British bats
on
do
the
if
back?
they're moving roost.
Right. So
They
if they're-
can carry the young with them, but usually they have a nursery roost, which
Right.
is usually sort of quite a warm environment, so that.
So up in a nicely insulated loft somewhere would be ideal for
Yeah.
for a nursery roost. Would that be the correct term?
Nursery roost, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is it kind of I don't know if it's a common misconception, but are all bats blind?
I've got that down as well. Look at that.
Bats aren't actually blind.
Okay.
Because they do say that term.
Yes.
you can see
If you're listening to this and you're in another country and you've not heard this, but in England we have a saying that says blind as a bat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's kind of just one of those things,
So
isn't
it's
it? You're like-
just everybody says it. Oh
Yeah.
yeah, must be as blind as a bat.
And again, it's that thing about them hanging upside down. It's like it's
Mhm.
not actually as common as
Common as you'd think
yeah.
it is.
Bats aren't blind. Depends on the species. Some they think don't have great night vision. Things like brown long-ears have quite large eyes,
Yeah.
but they glean insects, so they pick their insects off of vegetation, so leaves and things.
Yeah.
And they eat a lot of moths. And some of the moths have developed ears, so they can hear the bats coming. So the brown long-ears stop calling
So
just before taking their prey, so the moth
Right.
can't hear them coming.
because this leads on to more questions about the bats and their foraging, hunting, the way they go about that. Obviously, you brought up the eyesight issue.
Yeah.
So they're not using their eyesight to hunt with. Is that the case? Predominantly, they're using
echolocation.
echolocation. So you mentioned the bats. You mentioned the moths hearing the bats coming. Is that the bats? Oh, give it to you. Is that the moths detecting the bats in flight, as in them flapping around, or is that them detecting their echolocation?
They think some of the moths can actually hear the echolocations.
Right. So the closer they're getting to them, then obviously the more strong the signal.
The moths are sort of going to go, "Ooh, there's a bat," and sort of,
There is a threat, definitely.
yes.
Yeah.
So is that something that bats eat often? Is moths? Is it all sorts of insects? Or is it...
A pipistrelle eats mostly sort of small flies, sort of like gnats and things, and they can eat up
Please
to...
say mosquitoes.
Yes, they do like mosquitoes.
I'll tell you,
It's one of my
mosquitoes are
favourite
getting worse
bats
and
for
worse
that
these
reason.
days.
But a single bat can eat, a single pipistrelle can eat sort of 3,000 midges a night, so that's one of my favourite bats because I get eaten alive by mosquitoes.
Mosquitoes, I was going to say, I hate the damn things. Sorry,
and
mosquitoes.
then sort of like the large bats like notchules will take sort of flying beetles, so like dung beetles.
Something as big as a beetle.
Yes.
That's got quite a hard carapace on it, but I suppose bats got sharp teeth, yeah?
Yes.
Wow.
Not that I've been bitten by one, but
Good question, and one of my questions. Sorry, don't let me interrupt. You finish what you're saying.
Yeah, so again, it depends on the species as to what flies and moths make up the majority of the diet. I'm not sure if noctules do, but I know there are bat species that will eat crickets. Some of the American bats will take small lizards, small fish.
Oh wow, okay.
So
do British bats get on with each other? Do they share roosts? Do they? It's probably completely wrong for me to say this, but do they predate on each other, or do they just sort of chase each other off if they're in there? You kind of imagine that if you've got your hunting zone, your territory, do you try and chase other? You think most predators would mark their territory and try and chase other competition off. How does it work with bats? Or are they really cool and chilled out? You know?
Yeah, come and join. I've got loads of
really
mosquitoes over
Come
here.
on, join it. I've got a lovely warm loft here. You know.
There's plenty of moths around here.
You say that, and there are male bats that will take a breeding territory, and it's they'll pick a good roost with good foraging around it. And,
Okay. Yeah.
Would they protect that territory, or is that not a thing? They don't sort of like have mid-air dogfights with other bats.
They will.
Bat wars.
You do see bats chasing each other, and they do
Well,
think that is territorial.
I have
behaviour.
observed that before. Where there was across our little orchard that we got, we get bats coming through, especially this time of year as everything's warming up, and we've got the apple trees there, and that attracts insects, and they're flying around and having a whale. So I really enjoy watching them, and I have observed that where bats are literally a foot, 2 foot behind another bat, following exactly on its flight pattern. And when I say that could be really quite erratic.
Yeah.
And it amazes me how another bat can literally be so precise in following another bat.
Yeah, they're not 100% sure what the sort of chasing behaviour is. They think it might be territorial. Sort of.
Well, I
due
was
to
wondering
lack
if
of
that was to do with. Well, I don't know.
bugs, but-
When's the mating season start? Because I thought perhaps it was something to do with mating. Yeah, you might be following that, or the opposite, that it's a young bat learning how to hunt by following another.
Bat dating.
Bat dating or bat hunting training. I don't know.
Yeah, so the breeding period is sort of autumn.
Oh, that's so much later.
Much later in the year, and then the young are sort of born sort of June, July. So
if they're born June, July now, since we're in June, how long does it take for them to reach the maturity where they can leave the roost and start hunting for themselves?
I think it's usually about 5 or 6 weeks.
Well, not that long, really.
Not long, no.
Yeah,
So
So is all the hunting and flight pretty much instinctual then? Yeah, you hear of other animals sort of teaching their young how to hunt and things like that, but that it seems such a immensely complicated art using echolocation to bounce this off and send that signal out, locate a smallest of insects, and then zoom in and grab it.
Yeah.
For a baby bat, that must be some kind of just inherent genetic ability.
Yeah. They wouldn't know any different.
Or do they get taught?
Is there a bat school?
Is there a bat school? Yeah. Or are these all things about bats that still need to be learned?
yeah, it's still sort of think there's still a lot of research to be done into bats.
Because I always
Can't really stop one and ask them. So can you just tell us?
I kind of associate echolocation with like underwater stuff as well. So it's kind of
Sonar.
surprising. Yeah, we kind of have whales and things that use.
Yeah, I mean,
So
if you look at it from the perspective of a submarine, you don't have windows. Periscope, but that doesn't help you much. So when you're under the water and you're in something like a submarine, you can't have a nuclear sub suddenly ploughing into a big pinnacle of rock that just happens to be under the sea.
Yeah.
So they're sending out that sonar, that sound's bouncing back and creates a three-dimensional image of everything around them. So that's why these subs can stay under the water. The nuclear subs stay under the water for 6 months at a time, tracking around. And I dare say that over the years they've mapped out routes.
We do see those whales with like the big dome heads. And they use like.
But I would imagine it must work in a similar way with whales. I mean, we've heard whale song.
Yeah, it's just interesting that bats.
I mean, whale song is surely, it might be echolocation, and what other mammals in the sea? Dolphins, they would use that chasing the fish as well, wouldn't they? But again, there's a lot of social calls involved in that.
Yeah.
So the dolphins would be talking to each other and the whales singing to each other, because supposedly you can hear that for miles. I don't think whales are your speciality, but they say that they can hear them over such vast distances.
Yeah.
But that's going to be social calls, as well as perhaps, as you say, sounds to map their environment. Which brings us back to the bats. We saw using the
echolocation.
thank you. So coming back to the bats, using their echolocation to hunt. Do they also have social calls?
Yes, they do. I've actually one of the recordings. Pipistrels, there's definitely social calls.
Oh, you've brought some
So
recordings
I did
in.
bring some recordings in.
Oh, fantastic! Are you happy to play some for us?
Yeah.
So, which one are we going to start off with?
Probably start with the most common, which is sort of the pipistrels.
Okay, common pipistrel. Yeah.
So, you've got 3 species of pipistrel in the UK. So you've got common pipistrel, which call at 45 kilohertz. Soprano pipistrel, which is at about 55. And then the enthusiast pipistrel, which sort of, they're down sort of around sort of 35 to 40 kilohertz, pretty close to 40.
And which one are we about to listen to?
I think it's the common pipistrel that's got the social calls.
Okay, so let's take a listen to a common pipistrel. Okay, that was quite an interesting lot of clicks we were hearing there.
Yeah. So that recording is in time expansion, so it's to make it audible. The call is slowed down. Most of the guides you can get to bat calls use heterodyne, which is no good for sound analysis, so we don't use it in my line of work.
Okay.
So in that sort of pipistrel calls are described as sort of a wet slap.
Wet slap.
And then the feeding buzz is sort of like somebody blowing a raspberry.
Okay, so I'll just try it on Jack. Do you feel that, Jack?
Yes, I felt the wet slap.
I'm not going to feed on you, don't worry.
Okay.
Yeah, so but it does sound slightly different in the time expansion.
And with the detectors you use, do you also therefore get sort of like a waveform?
It depends on the bat detector. When I first started in ecology, I was using a Patron D240X, which is the standard.
Was that just sound only?
It was sound only.
So you're learning to hear the different species, literally from what we just heard.
Yes.
You'd through practice you'd learn and you say that's a common pip.
Yes.
Right.
Some of the detectors, it's probably more the sort of heterodyne. You scroll up and down through the frequencies. It doesn't record all frequencies. It just records the one you're on.
Right. So you tune it into a singular one to detect a singular.
Yeah, and then
like that 40 kilohertz.
Yes.
Where you said the common pipistrel are at. So you've got it tuned in. That's all you're going to pick up.
Yes, and then things like nocturals, they call right down at sort of 20 kilohertz, which is the sort of top end of human hearing. So I've worked with some birders that can hear sort of nocturnal social calls and nocturals without using a detector.
What's a birder?
Sorry, but a bird surveyor. So
right, a bird surveyor. Is that like what do you call ornithologist?
Yes, ornithologist.
Right. But you
call them birders.
Call them birders.
Like Twitcher, is that what they call them?
Twitchers are slightly different. They go out looking for particular birds.
Okay.
They sort
I've
of
just
it's a
heard
bit
that.
like a train spotter.
spotter.
Okay, so Twitcher is a train spotter for birds, and a birder is an
Is an
ornithologist, a
ornithologist.
specialist in
Yes,
birds
there's
for
birds that-
ecology reasons,
Yes.
ecological reasons. I don't know.
Usually mapping breeding habitats and things.
Right,
for,
okay. So should we
and things,
now
but-
compare
Um,
that call to a different one?
Yeah, if you want to listen to
Okay,
a noctule's probably easiest. 'Cause I've just
Noctule.
been,
Okay, so let's listen to a noctule.
so you should be able to hear the difference between them. The noctules are sort of a lot lower, and the calls are slower because the noctule's a bigger bat.
Okay.
The echolocation, so the frequency of how often they call is tied to their breathing and wing beat. So
Okay.
they sort of echolocate on the exhalation, and then
Right, that makes sense. Yeah.
So they're
So it-
sending that sound out like an opera singer,
yes,
and then you get a pause with them breathing back in again. So-
yes. Actually, interesting fact: most bats have a muscle in their ear that disconnects part of the ear, so they don't deafen themselves when they echolocate. Because the echolocation call sort of at the, I think they measured the echolocation. It's similar to, it's more or less 130 decibels. Which is the equivalent of us standing next to a jet engine.
Yeah.
And
Right, so
you'd
if
ruin your
if you're emitting that kind of level of sound, yes, you are going to go deaf very quickly, aren't you?
And you're creating that sound with your own mouth.
Yeah, you're doing it to yourself. You'd have a lot of deaf bats. Maybe it would be more correct to say, "Are you as deaf as a bat?"
Yes.
rather than as blind as a bat. You mentioned another bat when you came into the studio, and we were just having a chat before we came into the studio, that sounded very interesting. Which one was that?
Yes.
And should we listen to that? It's cool.
Yeah, there's a barbastelle, which I've got
Okay.
a call that I've brought with me.
Okay, let's dial up the barbastelle.
Barbastelle.
Barbastelle. Let's
Barbra
dial.
Streisand.
Barbra Streisand. Okay, it might be the Barbra Streisand of the bats. Who knows? Okay, listeners, let's listen to this one. You mentioned something very interesting about this. So,
So if you listen very carefully, you should be able to hear sort of an initial sort of echolocation call, followed by a fainter secondary call, which is actually an echolocation that they emit through their noses.
sorry, let's do that again.
Their nose.
So they're putting it out through the mouth.
So all the Vespa bats, which
What's a Vespa bat?
it's all the bats in the family Vespertilionoides. I'm not very good at the Latin names, which include most of our bats. The only two that aren't in that family are the horseshoe bats. They're a separate family. So all the Vespa bats, they echolocate through their throats, just sort of similar to how
Yeah,
we
and
speak. It's
most animals.
involving the
Yeah.
larynx. Anyway. And then the horseshoes actually echolocate through their noses.
So nothing comes out of the mouth.
No,
Oh, it's all out the nose.
it's all out the
How's
nose.
that? So they're separate vocal cords for
I
their nose?
don't have any horseshoe bats because we don't get them in this part of the country. I've
Okay.
only been on one survey.
Where would they normally be?
They're more sort of south coast and sort of Devon and
Do they have a-
southwest.
Does that mean they have a particular habitat that
Britain
that's why
is-
they haven't spread out from there?
Britain is at the edge of their range of distribution.
Oh, so they're across Europe as well, aren't they?
Yes, but yeah, we're kind of at the top end of their range, so they're limited to sort of south coast and southwest. If I really suggest googling horseshoe bats calls because they echolocate through their noses. It's a very warbling call. It sounds like clangers. I'm showing my age here, but
I know what you mean.
Jack, you know
Yeah.
Jack knows the clangers. Yeah, you're right,
so
Sarah.
It's sort
That's
of a
fine.
very whistling, sort of warbly call.
Is that it? So they don't make any noise through their mouths at all? It's all
No,
through
it's
the
all
nose?
through the nose, which is why they've got quite a involved nose leaf because it helps focus the
Is that the
signals.
point you see on the...
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't have a picture of a.
Does Adam have one?
It's all right. Pictures don't really work
Yes,
on
I know.
podcasts.
But, so they've got.
So if you got those bats, you get a picture of a bat in your mind, and it's maybe it's got like a mousy kind of face, and then you get the ones that have got the more wrinkled,
Yeah.
pointy
decorative
flap
nose.
of skin
Yeah.
on the front of the nose.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, you get a bat called a sword-nosed bat, which has its nose forms a great big sort of spike.
So, if you're one of the Vespa bats and
Yes.
you're calling out through your mouth, you're using your mouth to both call and to then catch prey. So are the horseshoe bats, where they'd be able to send out that echolocation through the nose, therefore the mouth is free to feed as it wishes? Is that more a successful advantage when it comes to bats?
I don't know.
Or is it just a
I
coincidence?
think it's just a different
part of evolution.
I think it's just a different sort of evolutionary
technique.
But it's obviously worked for them.
Yes. They also use Doppler shift to sort of judge the distance between them and their prey.
Right. So how long the sound is taken to bounce back to them.
Yeah. So you know when a police car or ambulance goes past, the
or
sound changes.
Yeah.
The Doppler effect.
You'll see the plane. You'll see the because the light moving faster than sound. You'll see it before you hear it, and then the sound gets greater and greater and greater, and then it disappears and disappears.
Yeah. So the Barbastelle actually uses both calls, but the echolocation through the nose is more of a secondary. I'm not sure what data they get from that. But,
Okay, so we've spoken about bats and using echolocation to hunt and catching a huge variation in different insects, from mozzies and gnats to beetles and moths. As a mammal, what do they drink? And the reason I ask that is because you've already said that if they go on the ground, they would find it very difficult to get up. They'd have to climb up to fly again. So, do they drink in the same way, or do they take all their fluid just from what they eat? How does that work? Maybe another example. Don't really know much about what people term as vampire bats, but I've seen them in Mexico and things where they're biting cows, bullocks in herds and lapping at the blood, and I believe that they get obviously not only their nutrients from drinking animals' blood, but obviously they're getting fluid from that as well. So how does that? Yeah. So how do they drink?
I've not seen any wild bats drinking. I mean, things like Torbentons feed over water anyway, so they probably do come down and sort of
scoop through. Or something.
Yeah, scoop through, probably like swallows and swifts. Captive bats that are sort of being cared for, you put water dishes in them, and they do sort of come down and sort of crawl over to the water dish and have a drink.
They would maybe find water that's built up in a guttering or something like that.
Bird tables.
I don't know. On the wing if they're flying and it's drizzly or raining. I was just curious. That's all.
Just flying with your mouth open.
That must be a good question. It's not actually one I know the answer to.
I imagine they would get a bit of moisture from the food they're eating.
Well, if they're eating that many insects,
I'd imagine a moth is quite dry to eat, to be honest.
I don't know. I've been a motorcyclist for years, and trust me, if you've got your visor up and one of them hits you straight in the face, you know it. It's like, what the hell? There's green mush everywhere. Oh, I think we've got a question, maybe. What's coming in from the gallery?
Hi there, it's Zak here.
Hello, Zak.
I have a question.
Oh, that's good.
When did bats become associated with vampires and Halloween?
That was actually to do with Bram Stoker and his novel Dracula. In British folklore, they're associated with sort of dogs, frogs, cats, anything but a bat. Yeah, so
well, you can't think of
bats and vampires it's Bram Stoker's fault all the way.
Oh wow.
So, you think of witches with eye of newt, wing of bat, and all this,
Yeah. Actually, going back to vampire bats, I was reading the other day that a vampire bat eats sort of the equivalent of 2 tablespoons of
blood.
Actually, I think it might be teaspoons of blood, sorry.
Teaspoons of
yes.
blood.
But they're very sociable, so if one vampire bat hasn't managed to feed, one of the other bats will regurgitate food for it, even if they're not related.
Nice.
Actually,
have some of your regurgitated blood,
please. Well, that's I mean, that's. I've heard the term guano. Is that correct? Yeah, we've used it for bat droppings, guano.
Yeah.
And I'm just thinking, if you're eating all that black pudding, basically, it must be very sloppy what's coming out. What's bringing my mind round is we haven't spoken about bat droppings. So are bat droppings, sticky icky bat droppings, or are they solid, or what are they? Yeah, because I'm just thinking
poo talk.
Poo talk. Well, it's very important. As a bushcrafter, I go out and I can track animals and I can see their scat being another word for feces or poop, and you can tell a predator from a herbivore and things like that.
Drunk man.
You're a drunk man. Where have you been, Jack? So you can tell all these things. So I want to know about bat scat. Bat poop.
Bat scat.
Bat scat. It's not a type of music, by the way. It's not like, blues music. Stop laughing.
So
Can't take it anywhere.
bat droppings look very much like mouse droppings. So a lot of people, they'll see droppings in the loft and think they've got mice and put traps down, and they've actually got bats.
Right.
So a way to tell the difference is a mouse dropping is, well, unless it's fresh, it is solid. Whereas a bat dropping, you can crumble it between your fingers, and it's quite shiny because it's made up from the exoskeletons of the...
I'm sorry, you said if you squish it between your fingers, is that something you do regularly?
Yes. Yes, I do. But I mean, bat droppings are completely harmless
So they don't
from
carry
at least
any
the
kind of-
species over here. As long as they're...
Because you
You
kind
know,
of think
as
of
long as
you
you-
kind of think of things like rats and mice and they're poopy. You don't want to touch it or get it because it's like you think don't know what kind of bacteria is in it. Yeah.
Because it's mostly exoskeletons from insects, so it's completely harmless. The only time you'll probably really get sort of odour from it is if it's got wet and starting to moulder.
Well, that's what I was
but,
thinking about. The ones that eat blood like vampire bats. It's kind of going to be a bit stodgy. Isn't it? Well, no, because
I've never seen any vampire bat poo, so
Okay.
I can't comment on
you did mention that bat poo is sparkly.
Yes.
So how's that work?
Is that where they got the inspiration for Twilight?
Twilight, sparkly vampire. it's all like little midges that they've been eating. Oh dear, I'm going to look at those movies in a completely different way now. Hang on, I've just got to go and visit the loo. It's all sparkly. Sorry. Sorry. So how do you know this? I'm just imagining you're up in a loft somewhere, squishing.
Glittery poo.
It's like fairy poo.
Literally, because it's the exoskeletons of the insects because it's made of sort of
Well, like the
keratin,
wings and everything, yeah.
It's more sort of the keratin that makes up the sort of insects exoskeletons.
Right.
It's very similar to your sort of nails in.
So that's
You
what.
so
five-
you know,
five-
when
You're up
when
there
the
with
light
you're up
shone-
there with your torch.
Yeah, and sort of
You give it a squish, and it's all sparkly.
Well, it's not completely sparkly. It's not
Under
like
your eyes.
it's not like glitter. But yeah, that you'll see sort of light catching on it. So yeah,
Okay,
that's how
right.
to tell if it's a.
Or if you
Bat
do that
was-
and it doesn't sparkle, you go, oh no, what have I just squished?
Got mouse poo all over my fingers.
Yeah,
I'll take it you take a packet of wipes with you.
Well, usually if we find bat droppings,
Yep.
we know it's bat droppings. We
So-
take samples for DNA analysis because it's.
Oh, right.
There are papers that, because back in the day before DNA analysis, people used to sort of figure out what bats were in the loft by the droppings because things like paper straws, you won't see them in the loft.
Yeah.
You'll see droppings, but you won't actually see the bats.
Yeah. Well, yeah, as you say, they're so tiny, you wouldn't even know.
But yeah, this day and age, we just tend to send sort of poo samples off to
Yeah.
be analysed. It's a lot more accurate and.
Okay. Question, going back to the calls, which we were talking about earlier, are there different terminologies for the things that they do? Flying around, if you see a bat, I think you mentioned the word foraging earlier, so I'm assuming that if it's looking for something to eat, or if it's heading back to its roost or coming away from its roost, do you have different words for these things?
Right, so commuting bat is when it's usually moving between sort of its roost and where it's foraging.
Right, so
and it's
that'd
usually-
be flying pretty much in a straight
Yeah,
line.
it's pretty much straight level flight. And then foraging behaviour, they're sort of looping about.
Right, which I
and
see
you-
in
which
my
you'll-
garden
Yeah,
a
you'll
lot.
see over.
Yeah, I've seen. Yeah.
Yeah. And then there's different terms for how they feed. So you've got gleaning, which I mentioned earlier, where they're picking the insects off hedgerows and things. Which
Do they do that literally diving past, or do they hover? Can they hover?
brown longheads certainly can hover. Pretty sure I've seen a pipper straw sort of hovering. I was on survey and it flew past me and came back and sort of hovered near me. It was fluttered near me, I should say. I think it was like, what is that and what's it? I
What's it
haven't
do?
seen that be there before. Yeah, and then you get sort of aerial hawking, which things like horseshoes. They'll hang up on a perch and wait for an insect to fly past and then swoop, drop off the perch.
So they
and
wait for
grab
the
it and-
insects to come to them.
Yes,
Yeah. I prefer that idea, I think.
Yeah, and then you get sort of fly catching, which most bats do, where they're flying on the wing and catching the insects in flight. They actually either catch them in the mouths, or they sort of catch them with their tail and sort of flick them up towards their mouth.
Oh wow!
Wow, that is
So-
some skill
impressive,
set. Yeah, skill set.
Whilst flying as well.
Yes.
What about when they go back to the roost? Is it
You get sort of dawn swarming, which is
swarming?
usually when they're emerging, they come straight out of the roost because
Okay, so you
there's a
can
greater risk
imagine
of
them going sort
predation.
of like pop, 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 pop. They're coming out.
Yeah,
If they all decide to come home at the same time, you know, it's like damn, you know, it's 6 bats stuck in a hole at the same time.
because they're at greater risk of predation coming out of the roost. They literally sort of come straight out and go sort of straight off towards where they're foraging. In the mornings, they'll fly around sort of near the roost entrance. They'll maybe land a couple of times near it and take off, and then land again and then go into the roost. So that's dawn swarming. You get autumn swarming in a lot of bats, sort of more the horseshoes, which is mating behaviour. So they're sort of, you get big numbers of sort of males and females flying around together.
Is there any different size in the males and females, or is it hard to tell between the two? I mean, they'd obviously know.
I think they're pretty much sort of roughly the same size.
Is there a way of telling the gender by the call or anything?
No.
So it's just okay.
Okay, and
usually, if you're trying to ID the sex of a bat, it's in hand.
right,
So is Adam a boy or a girl?
you know, if we misnamed him.
He's a boy, as far as I'm aware.
Can we look at his?
Yeah.
Oh, wait, no, this
If you want to have a look at his bits.
No, we don't. I take it that bats, like most mammals, mate in the same similar way. As...
Yeah. There you go.
Oh, we're having a very close. Oh dear, he died happy. Sorry.
It's the first ever bat winky I've ever seen.
Bat winky. What do you like? Okay. Which actually, you talking about? Can you tell the sex of a bat from the way it looks? When I think of other animals that I observe in the wild, often it could be birds or whatever, but you get colour differences. You know, the males tend to be the ones that are very colourful, and the females, you know, to take a pheasant for example, real colourful male pheasant, and then a nice camouflage female pheasant. So, do bats come in different colours? Can they vary in their colour due to their sex, or just the species? Can they be different colours?
Yeah, the species are different colours. I mean, going back, Barbastelle are sort of black in colour. Noctules are sort of a gingery brown, quite dark. Lyslers are a lot lighter, sort of gingery colour, but you do get some colour variation.
This is gonna be a daft
between...
question, but you don't get any anomalies like in other animals where you'll get an albino bat. Has that ever been recorded? I'm just interested.
In theory, you should get albinos.
Well, you get albino humans, you get albino deer, white hart, for
Imagine it
example.
white with red eyes.
Yeah.
You know,
I mean, you usually get sort of albino and melanistic forms of most species.
Well, like with the black squirrel, they're grey squirrels, which is the
yes.
opposite, where they instead of being white, they're black.
Yeah, that's called melanistic.
So the bats could be even blacker then instead of being white.
I mean, I've not seen any pictures of any albinos.
That
doesn't mean they aren't
I just
out there.
wondered.
But I imagine that probably makes them at higher risk of predation because you've got nice white bat flying around.
But I suppose the thing is, it's like any animal where you suddenly have that genetic throw up where they suddenly become, you suddenly get an albino animal, then it could. Oh, look, we've
got a picture of what I assume is an albino bat.
Right. So what's happened, listeners, is Jack has now Googled up.
That is.
That's a toy. That's a toy bat. It's not a real bat.
No, this one.
No, that one is. Yeah. So what have we got? What's that top one? So we're just
Honduran white bats.
All right.
Well,
So
it wouldn't be.
but that's just a natural.
That's just
Yeah,
white,
they're
isn't
all
it?
white.
they're all white. I mean,
They're white.
you
They're
get
white.
tent bats that are white. They actually chew along the rib of banana leaves to form a sort of shelter for them to roost in.
Right.
They look like little white cotton warbles. They are really cute.
I think you found the
Yeah, I
toy
found
bat. Yeah, you found it. That's not a real bat, Jack.
I kind of want it to be.
He's on Amazon. You don't order bats from Amazon. Oh dearie me, what are we like? So there are different colours when it comes to the species or family of bat. Yeah.
Yes.
And
I mean, things like brown long-eared bats. You get grey long-eared bats. And I think it wasn't until like 1960s that they realised that they were actually two separate species. They just thought they were sort of a slightly greyer form, but they've actually been DNA and sort of discovered that they are two separate species. Again, whiskered bats and brown bats were thought to be one species and were separated out. Pipistrelles as well.
Yeah.
The common pipistrelle has a darker face than the soprano, which is one of the ways to sort of ID them in hand. I've not seen any Malthusias because, but again, that until recently, I think they've only just sort of recently separated those out. So.
Yeah. So it's still a lot to be learnt
Yes.
with bats. Yeah.
Well, in order to learn about bats, obviously you've got to come into contact with bats.
Yes.
And you did mention briefly at the beginning some rules and regulations regarding bats.
Yes.
So what kind of qualifications do you have to you've obviously got a bat license and things. So being fully licensed to do what you do as a job, what if just any old person, Jack or I, we found a bat? What would you do with it? Because we're obviously not licensed to handle a bat. We wouldn't know what to do with it.
No. There are places like the BCT which have a bat helpline.
BCT.
Sorry, the Bat Conservation Trust.
Right.
Yes. Sorry, I do talk in abbreviations. Just let me know if I start on about blebs, which is a brown long-eared bat.
Blebs. Do you like blebs? I saw this really nice bleb the other night.
I'm not going to say what I was going to say.
Yes, my parents moan at me all the time for talking in abbreviations. So Bat Conservation Trust have a bat helpline. Most bat groups will have bat helpline and carers that will injured bats. But if you find an injured bat, put gloves on, use a cloth to pick it up. There is this, I think it's like 1% of one species of bats carry rabies.
Oh, okay.
So I'm actually vaccinated.
I was going to ask you about that. That was one of my further questions. That with bats, you do hear about bats can pass on rabies, and is that something that people should be concerned about in the UK? Do bats carry rabies?
I mean, there's only. It's a low risk of getting rabies, but you have to actually be handling them.
Right. So as somebody who is allowed by law to handle bats, you are vaccinated for rabies.
Yeah. My licence doesn't actually cover me for handling.
Well, you can handle Adam because he's dead.
Yes.
Poor old Adam.
Usually, if I'm doing handling, it's either with a bat group or it's under supervision of a licensed person. My licence as Class 1 actually covers me for going into roosts. Or lofts where there are bats present. I think Class 2 covers handling and netting and things, and then sort of levels 3 and 4 are sort of more sort of netting for radio tracking and things.
Okay, but you have to be vaccinated if you're going to be in close proximity of bats.
Yeah, I mean I'm trying to work towards my Class 2 now, so I'm rabies vaccinated. So sort of starting to do handling.
You're all right if Jack loses it and starts frothing at the mouth. That's why he keeps. Hey, look, water, Jack. You're scared of water. Stay away from the water. So you're in a close proximity of bats, or you might pick a bat up if needs be. But do they bite to protect themselves anyway? I mean, is that something that they do, or is it you're really extremely unfortunate if you got bitten by a bat?
I mean, they will bite.
You might pick up other mammals and they'll sink their teeth into you. So
the one sort of pipistrelles that I've handled, they do show you your teeth. It's, something that's it's just like
this tiny little thing glaring at this giant.
I'll give it a go.
I'm going to have you, son. I'm going to have you. Come anywhere near me.
I'll bite your kneecap.
I've heard sort of some of the carers that they're looking after nocturals and they bite. But I mean, most things will bite if you.
If
they're
but they don't. They won't bite as in their bite being provoked. They're just biting because they're in a stressful situation.
And just sort of defending themselves. But you're not going to get a bat flying around, swoop down and bite you.
No. But and so the likelihood of actually getting rabies off a bat in the UK very, very low.
Very low. And like I said,
you said 1%, didn't you?
Yeah, I think. I don't know if the numbers have changed, but certainly when I first started out in ecology, it was thought to be 1% of one species. Yeah. So very low chance, but if you're going to be handling bats, because you developed an interest in bats and you want to be handling, then make sure you get your rabies.
Yeah. So your work obviously involves doing surveys, so it must be quite varied what you do and possibly quite intricate and complicated. So if you could sort of like sum up what's involved in surveying bats. I presume that if a construction company or somebody is wanting to do some work on knock a building down or do alterations to a building, then, and you mentioned them about bats possibly living in trees, so there's a construction site like what's the new train that's going up north?
HS2.
The HS2, that kind of thing, where they're going through woodland and things. What's involved in them? I assume by law these things have got to have a bat survey.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just big developments. Even if you're just going to re-roof your house, I mean,
Right.
Things like people's stores will use new builds. So yeah, if you can see gaps under the tiles, or you've got holes in your soffit boxes,
So the
barge
word
boards, fascias.
potential.
Yeah.
Is what would come to my
Yeah. So
mind.
if you're demolishing a building, doing any works to the roof, adding an extension that's going to tie into the roof, or doing any tree works where you're going to be taking limbs off or felling trees, then it's probably a good idea to speak to an ecologist, see if they.
Okay, so
need a bat
can you
survey.
get in serious trouble if you went ahead with works and didn't have a bat
Yes,
survey?
like I said at the beginning, because they're fully protected by law, any destruction to a roost, even if the bats aren't present,
Right,
you're breaking the law.
so if you were going to do a loft conversion, for
Yeah.
example, on your house, and you've put in planning permission, then the council's
Yeah.
okayed your planning permission, but is it incorporated within that planning permission that somebody somewhere says you've got to have a bat survey first
Yeah, usually
before any
if you're
work undertaken?
if you're putting in a planning application, the local authority will ask for an ecological survey done.
Right, so that's just part of the planning permission,
it's-
yeah?
yes.
Or before the building, obviously, the work starts.
Yeah, I mean,
And that's when you come in.
that's when I come in. So it's usually an internal inspection of a building.
Okay.
If the work's to a building.
Yep.
If you're going
So if it's
do works.
if it's a woodland,
If it's woodland, there's a tree inspection.
so that's literally walking from tree to
It's
tree.
it's looking at the trees to see if there's any potential suitable features. So any cracks, woodpecker
I was going to
holes,
say woodpecker hole.
lifted bark, sort of thick ivy stems that have potential for sort of bats to be using
Now
it.
I can see if it's a building you're surveying and you're going into the attic, or if it's a barn, you're having to somehow climb up there and have a good look. How do you do that with trees? I mean, do you physically have to carry a ladder with you, or?
A lot of it you can do from the ground. I mean, over winter is the best time for tree assessments because there's no leaves on the trees. So
Much easier to see those cracks.
visibility is much easier. There are bat surveyors with climbing licence. Qualified to climb trees, so
Yeah,
they go up and
basically
inspect
like
and use
a tree
endoscopes.
surgeon
Yeah,
would be, yeah.
so they all climb and use endoscopes to investigate cracks.
Okay, sticking an endoscope into your
Crack.
having a good look around. So what happens if you suddenly find that you've got a roost in a tree, or you've got a roost in a building, and the person still, the HS2 still wants to go through there, the person still wants to change their roof?
Okay.
What happens? I mean,
So you'd have initial survey done by an ecologist to determine sort of potential for roofs. Like I say, lifted tiles around, sort of hung tile. If your building's got hung tile, sort of gaps underneath.
I can imagine they can get under the flashings as well.
Lead flashings, spaces around the chimney, loose mortar around bricks, gaps in the fascia and the soffit boards. And any sort of access point where they can.
Okay, so bats have been detected. You've been up there. You've done that initial survey.
Yeah. You then have, depending on whether bats are found or it's just potential for bats.
Right. So
you have.
could that be? I mean, I don't know if this is correct. Could it be like a transitory roost, so bats might come there and then go away again, or?
Bats use several different roosts
Right.
throughout the year, and they will move between roosts.
So it could be a roost they just use at one time of the year.
Yeah.
Right.
But again, if there's any signs or any potential, then you need to have a survey done. If you
Okay.
haven't had a survey done and you find bats, stop work, contact Natural England, because you're at risk. Well, you will be breaking the law if you destroy a roost.
What sort of
It's a minimum.
penalty?
It's a minimum of 6 months in jail and an unlimited fine.
Ouch.
So yeah,
If you're listening out there, make sure you do your bat survey.
Death penalty by bat.
Yes.
and
Get a bat the night dress, as they used to say.
yeah, I mean the bats won't stop the works. You'll just have to mitigate. So create the low end scale put up a couple of bat boxes or bat tiles into the roof so they can still access between the tile and the roof.
Yeah, so is that done during the work or after or before the work? I mean, can you actually work on a building if there's bats there, or do the bats need to be relocated, removed? I don't know.
It's done under license, so it's usually depends on the type of roof. So it will either be timed to avoid when the bats are using it.
Okay.
Usually, if it's I don't do a lot with licensing, so but yeah, so minimum, like I say, you'll have to put up a couple of bat boxes. Worst case, you'd have to create sort of a bat loft for them.
Yeah, I think I've seen. Would I be right in saying that I've seen in constructions bat bricks that people put in? They incorporate them in the building.
Yeah, you can get bat bricks that go into the cavity wall, so you've just got a small opening in the brickwork, and then it's an enclosed brick.
So do developers see you as the enemy to their?
They can do. Ecologists usually get blamed for holding everything up. It's not usually our fault. The thing is, surveys can only be done at certain times of the year.
Do you have to do? I mean, you've gone in, you've checked the building out. Do you have to do several surveys? Is there a minimum amount or a set amount of surveys?
So once the initial surveys have identified the potential for bats there, depending on whether the potential is considered low, medium, or high, which there's lots of factors involved, sort of foraging habitat, sort of the suitability of the features, the age of the building. You'll have sort of between sort of 1 or 2 dusk dawn surveys. If you've got things like a confirmed route, then you do 3 visits, which will be 2 dusks and a dawn, which then informs the licence from Natural England, which because any works to a roost, you have to get a mitigation licence.
So you mentioned dusks and dawns. Something we haven't covered is, I don't see bats flying around during the daytime. Have you ever seen any?
No, I don't think so.
So are they limited in just the time they fly?
Usually if you see a bat flying during the day, it's been disturbed.
Right.
They usually come out, saying that nocturnes will come out sort of before sunset.
Mm-hmm.
That's when you kind of see them most, isn't it? When the sun's going down, you see kind of in your garden.
But I mean, we do emergence and sort of re-entry surveys.
So emergence would be at the dusk.
At dusk, when the bats are coming out, the dawns are the re-entries,
Right.
And they usually start sort of 15 minutes to half hour before sunset, and end sort of an hour and a half after sunset.
So that must be difficult to see them if it's a dusk, because obviously it's getting dark.
Yeah.
So what sort of equipment, apart from your bat detector, do you have any other equipment that you'd use?
They're starting to bring in the use of IR cameras, which
IR meaning?
infrared.
Oh, right, so like night vision.
Yes, or thermal imaging, and that's going to sort of be included in sort of best practice guidelines from about next year, I think.
Right, so what you need to, not knowing exactly where bats may be exiting or entering a building, do you have to set like a ring of cameras up around the building? Or actually, that's a question. I'm talking to you about surveying. Do you just by yourself? I mean, you can't survey surely a whole building by yourself.
No. Also, no lone working at night is usually policy for most ecological companies.
So would you go out in teams of 2, or is it dependent on the size of the...
It depends on the size of the building and the complexity of the roof. I mean, if it's sort of, nice, easy sort of it's like terrace house, or even a detached, if it's just a straightforward sort of gable-ended double pitch roof, then that's fine. It's when you start getting really complex roofs,
right, so
where
you've
got wings sticking out.
If it's what you call a simple house, you'd have one person on one corner and one person on the opposite corner, so they can look at both the end of the house and the back, and the end of the house and the front.
Yeah, so you usually position people on corners because then they can see.
Okay, so you'd be sitting there, you'd have your bat detector, you're using your eyesight, and you're putting your IR cameras out as well. Okay. That's pretty comprehensive, isn't it? Technology, but they didn't have that.
A big bat operation.
Yeah, that sounds quite complicated.
Operation Bat.
Operation Bat. Have you got any more questions, Jack?
I saw a picture of what I think they called it, like a flying fox or something.
Yes.
Is that true? Is that a thing? Because it's like, it looked like the size of a human. I don't think it was huge.
Yeah, flying foxes can be quite big.
I think they're South America.
Yeah, they're sort of the megabats.
That is a megabat. It's not actually a fox that's decided to go flying.
The megabats don't
Why is it called a
echolocate.
flying fox? Is it because it looks like a fox?
Shall I see if
or-
I can? I'll see if I can find a
Yeah,
photo.
I think the face is sort of.
So
very
they're as big as
sort of
Sarah.
fa-
You're saying they
of
look
a-
as big as a human.
I'm not quite sure how big a flying fox gets, but they are
Would they?
quite big.
Would they eat fruit bats? Okay, let's make it. Fruit bats obviously eat fruit,
Yes.
not insects.
Yeah, so
So-
the megabats tend to eat sort of fruit and
Whoa!
nectar.
Yes,
and
Jack's just googled up one. It looks like a young lady. Well, he's a lady, isn't it? That's holding a sort of
Yeah,
child.
look at this one.
Oh, that's
Look at
hanging.
that.
God, gee, because that's
It's like a person.
That is like a person.
It's like a
hanging-
man in a bin bag.
that's huge. That's hanging off the front gutter of a house.
But yeah, I've seen pictures like this before from South America and things. I wondered if they were
They're
actually.
massive.
Yeah.
It's amazing that they can like stay airborne.
yeah, I think that's probably about the biggest bat you're ever going to
Yeah.
get. I think
So that's the
anything
high
after
end
that,
bat.
yeah, anything bigger than that's probably not
Puts
going to be able
Adam
to
to
fly.
shame a little bit. doesn't
But
it?
you say they feed off of fruit.
Yeah, so the megabats
So you're not going to
tend
suddenly
to
get
eat
savaged
sort of-
by a megabat.
Yeah, no, they tend to eat sort of
That one looks
fruit
stuffed.
and nectar and
Yeah,
pollen.
You
and
found the Adam of megabats.
It says large flying fox, and then fruit bat, but I'm not sure if that's
Okay.
how scary or whatever
yeah,
that is.
so,
That
yeah,
could be
the-
quite terrifying.
Yeah, so the megabats, they don't tend to echolocate. They do kind of use an echolocation, but it's just sort of a clicking noise that they make with their tongues. It's
Yeah.
just sort of
Well,
when they're sort of.
There's a tree. Let's eat.
It's more sort of when they're sort of roosting in caves and things to navigate.
Right, so
but-
navigate in the cave.
yeah, but they've got
So-
quite. Usually, the megabats have quite large eyes. They have quite good eyesight.
Do they
so,
still feed just during dawn and dusk, or
Um,
are they those sort of bats out and about any time they fancy?
I think they're mostly sort of nocturnal and crepuscular rather than diurnal. Sorry. big
Please
words.
explain to the listeners.
Right, diurnal
yes.
means they're active during the day, crepuscular means they're out at dusk and dawn, and nocturnal is sort of-
Corpuscular.
Corpuscular.
Let's just say
it's an awful
Corpuscular.
word.
corpuscular.
That's the word of today. And the corpuscular means
They're out at dusk and dawn.
a corpuscular bat.
Corpuscular.
It's a muscular corpuscular bat. Oh, superb. Okay, I want to move on to maybe a little bit of myth and folklore because I want to kind of address this. Zach obviously brought up a good question about Dracula earlier. Bats do seem to be associated with negativity. You know, people always, there was a term, you know, people always worrying about getting bats in their hair, things like that. And bats always seem to be, is it simply because these creatures,
We see a cave or something in a cartoon, and all the bats come flying out of it. Yeah.
or a haunted house, all the bats come flying out of it, or dare I say it, a Batman chose the bat to scare people because bats are like, no,
Yeah.
it's a Batman.
I
it's
mean,
a
if I
giant
saw a
Batman."
flying fox flying towards me,
Yeah,
I'd be scared.
I'll be pretty worried about one of them things. Yeah. So yeah, is it just really unfair that they have gained this kind of negative notoriety?
Yeah, I mean, in China, bats are considered lucky, so.
We all know how that started.
Yeah. Oh no, not in China. It's not the lucky bat.
Yes, I
Would you like one for dinner?
I was reading the other day, they've only found COVID in one sort of species of bat in China, but the genetic structure of the COVID is nothing like COVID-19.
Right.
It's the equivalent of comparing a chimpanzee to a human.
Okay.
They're
Well, they are
but
similar.
Yeah.
genomes, but they're not
Not
that
the same.
closely related. You're not going to
Cousins,
mistake
yeah.
it for your cousin
Yeah.
or anything.
Yeah.
So you're saying that the theory or hypothesis that COVID-19 came from eating bats?
From what I've read, there is no proof that it's
propaganda.
actually.
Is it propaganda?
It
Or
was
is
the big they. They
is it
made
they
it.
again, or was it more likely to have escaped a Chinese laboratory? Another podcast.
Yeah. I mean, during COVID, they've stopped all hibernation checks. If you were having to go into potentially buildings with bats, you had to wear masks and gloves, so you weren't at risk of transferring COVID to the bats.
Mhm.
So
Oh, okay.
yeah.
So one area which I think we haven't covered is the yearly life cycle. We've talked about breeding, we've talked about feeding, we've talked about roosting, and then we come across. You don't see bats during 12 months of the year, do you?
No, usually
So
the
What we're talking about is hibernation, aren't we?
yes. So they're usually hibernating.
Did you say Christmas bats? I
Um,
suppose that's why they don't have bats. Mind you, I bet you've got bats in your Christmas tree.
no, No, I haven't.
You don't?
Actually.
Oh,
No, I need to
you
address that.
You need to address that. You need to
Just
have
put Adam on the top.
bats instead. Oh no, put Adam in a tutu.
A little halo up his head.
Poor Adam.
Poor Adam.
Yes.
So-
So the bat survey season is usually sort of mid-March through till sort of September.
Does it push into October?
I think it can do.
Is that weather dependent? For example, at the moment,
Yeah.
I've got to say, listeners, we are absolutely sweltering in the sound studio at the moment.
It's on the side of warm.
Yeah, it's on the side of warm.
Yeah.
It's way
And
above
because when you'll be hearing this a few weeks after we recorded it, but when when we're recording, the temperatures in the UK are peaking at the moment. This is the hottest it's been this time of this particular year. I think tomorrow they're estimating to be about 33 degrees. Spain's already hitting 40 degrees. I know that India's had over 50 degrees, hasn't it?
Nice.
So we are getting rather warm here. So
Yes, it's
can that global warming temperature, if it's down to global warming, if that temperature change in weather patterns, can that push the bat's hibernation cycle, slightly wonky? Could it have a negative effect on them? Could it keep them out of hibernating because the weather's a lot warmer?
Yeah, usually when they hibernate, so they will sort of become more because they go into torpor. So hibernation's that heartbeat drops, body temperature drops. So.
And like other animals that hibernate, I take it they've got to stock up on food before they go into hibernation.
they have to be a certain weight to hibernate, otherwise they won't survive.
I'll be all right for hibernating.
Yes, I usually put hibernation weight on over
Yes,
winter.
that's a good excuse. I think we all do that at Christmas, don't we?
So small fluctuations in temperature will cause them to wake up. I mean, usually if you do with bat surveys, if you're doing a hibernation check, you're in there as short a time as possible because 2 or 3 people, just the heat put out by their body temperature will.
Don't we know it in the studio?
We'll wake the bats
If we had
up.
bats in here, like they'd be all over the place at the moment.
Adam's not resurrected.
Yeah, that zombie bat. No, that's how it starts, doesn't it? He comes back to life, bites Sarah. That's it. Everything's good. He's all right because he's in the gallery. Zak's given us a double thumbs up.
Global warming, as the temperatures get warmer, the bats won't hibernate. But if there's not the insect population for them,
so could that be inevitably a problem for the future? Yeah, because they say insects, the population of insects are going down. We've got things. They're always saying that the population of bees are going down. I don't suppose bats eat bees, but the population of insects, are they generally dropping due to global warming? Or I associate things like mosquitoes, midges, with when the heat comes out, then they flourish. So
Was that thing, isn't it, where you're driving down like a country lane and you get out, you've got like bugs all over the front of your car, but that's not really such a thing anymore, is it?
do you know, that's a fair point. Yeah, I used to have front grille on the car used to be absolutely plastered with bugs.
Yeah, you don't really get that anymore.
unfortunately, increased use in pesticides and things in farming have sort of
Had a knock-on effect.
Knock-on effect, yeah, on bats. Habitat fragmentation is a
How stable
problem.
is the bat
Community.
in the UK? Have you found a decrease in bats? Is it a healthy population? Is it? Do you do sort of kind of like a consensus of bats to know roughly where the fluctuations in population
Yeah, there
are?
are national bat monitoring
Census,
programs going on. Off the top of my head, I can tell you sort of how the populations are fluctuating, but certainly last 50 years or so, there has been a massive decline in
Right, so
in
it has
bats.
dropped.
Yes, and like I say, that's due to loss of habitat.
So
habitat
kind of thing,
fragmentation.
showing loss of habitat, and of course in the past 50 years, the country's population of humans has obviously rocketed, which has therefore led on to huge amount more house building, which kind of thinks that therefore there'd be more places for them to roost, or is it just the fact
you're
that
losing the foraging habitat?
losing their feeding habitat, not so much as a loss of habitat for where they need to roost, but
I think,
the food supply.
Yeah, I mean things like lighting, so street lighting.
How does that affect bats? Because I didn't think that lights, or again, completely naive here, this is what we want to learn. How do street lights affect bats if they're just... I kind of imagine a street light to be calling out for moths to come to it and would be a great feeding area, a zone for
things
bats.
like notches and people straws certainly used to feed round the sort of the sodium streetlights.
Are they the old orange ones?
Yeah, the
aren't
old orange ones.
they've changed them all over to LEDs now.
Yeah, I have. Certainly last year I was doing a survey and to see pips foraging around sort of street lighting. So
you'll see them looping, doing that looping foraging.
Yeah, around the street light catching.
So what's
insects.
the negative
Things,
aspect of them?
There are, I mean, pips and noctules and maybe liselers are the only ones that will forage around street lights. Things like, I think it is the barber stell. They don't like strong light. I mean, even strong moonlight.
So if it's a real full moon, a harvest moon, that kind of...
I mean, usually if we're doing...
Is that simply down to their eyesight? Is it just the lights putting them off?
It's just sort of a greater risk of predation. Again,
So what
because owls will eat...
Owls, right, so they do have natural predators then?
Yeah, tawny owls are sort of the worst for taking bats. Cats as well. They reckon that the current cat population counts for, I think it's like 100,000 maybe injured bats a year.
I'm kind of imagining. I'm kind of imagining.
You've got cats, sort of keep them in from sort of dusk.
Well, I mean, we do have cats. Do you have cats, Jack? No,
Nope.
you've got a dog, haven't you?
Yes.
Okay, so dogs are good. Yeah, dogs are okay.
Yeah.
We've got cats. I've never found an injured or dead bat, and we certainly not have had any brought back. But how would they be catching the bats? Is it simply that a bat is either unfortunately gone low, or a cat's been sitting on the roof?
Yeah, I mean, they will sit.
You've got to be pretty nimble to sort of catch a bat.
I mean, I have heard of bats sort of sat out, sort of on the roof, sort of near a roost entrance, sort of swiping at the bats as they come out trying to catch them.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Oh, I see what you mean. So they're actually coming back. They're coming to their roost, and the cat's been sitting right on the entrance of where they're roosting.
On the doorstep.
Also, because they roost in trees, cats will.
So is that what a tawny owl might do? I mean, I'm just trying to think of a tawny owl hunting. Obviously, they've got the big eyes, and the way the feathers are designed around the head for picking up sound, isn't it?
Yeah, I imagine they take a few in flight, but yes, again, they would take them.
So you mentioned about the moth possibly detecting the bat about to strike, so that's kind of an early warning system for the moth. Do bats have a similar one for predators? Are they aware of predators?
As they're echolocating, they will pick up
a large thing heading towards them.
Yes.
I suppose that's how they miss each other, because they must be echo-detecting each other, so they don't collide.
Also, if you get a couple of bats foraging sort of in the same area, they will change the frequency of their calls, so they
don't.
So they're not both calling at the same frequency.
Right. So that would be like having two walkie-talkies on the same frequency, and if you both push the button at the same time, you're cancelling each other out, aren't you?
Yeah. So.
Okay. So that means if you're working on two different frequencies, then you're not interfering, even though you're standing next to each other. You know?
I mean, that was one of the other theories for bats chasing each other, because they're sort of working together, sort of catching prey, and sort of, you're not going to fly into your other fellow bat if you're following along behind him. So
right, okay, okay, that's a fair point.
Yeah.
Interesting. Do you have any interesting bat stories you can tell us about? It could be anything from things to do with bats, things that have happened to you on surveys, your life as an ecologist and somebody that is obviously out late at night and in the wee hours when everybody is thinking about getting up for work in the morning. You're probably heading home from work. You probably see things, or what sort? Have you got any tales?
Have you ever seen a Bigfoot?
Have you ever seen a Bigfoot? Yeah.
No, I did get mistaken for a traffic cone one.
You got mistaken as you must have been wearing high vis at the time.
I had a high vis coat on.
Don't tell me some students picked you up and stuck you on top of a statue somewhere.
I use
It's going to be quite painful.
Yes, my survey chair is a beach chair, so I'm quite low to the ground. And I was sat behind a buttress of a garden wall, and they obviously just saw my high vis jacket sticking out the glass, and the dog walker went past.
Oh no, you didn't get weed on.
No, the dog walker went past. He was like, "Oh, I thought you were a traffic cone." It's like, no.
Oh no! It conjured up terrible images then of suddenly. Do you have any? Have you had any comedy moments of falling through a roof while you're on a survey, or a ladder disappearing under you? I would have thought all health and safety things have been taken into consideration, listeners, at this point.
Yes. No, well, thank goodness I haven't. I've had colleagues that have put their foot through somebody's ceiling or fallen through a hidden loft hatch.
A hidden loft hatch.
Yes, so someone put
To the
fell-
secret
Booby
back cave.
trap.
To the back
Yeah.
cave.
To the back cave.
Yeah, I think it was under sort of the insulation.
Oh, right,
I'm
yeah,
not- I'm
yeah.
not
So a
quite
weak-
sure
a
how
weak
they
point,
ended up-
yeah.
how they ended up going through it, but
Legs
Yes.
akimbo with a 4x2 between your legs. Yeah. The two little legs dangling out the bottom.
but usually you sort of assess the dangers before you go into buildings.
I take you obviously, without doubt, you're insured to enter somebody's home and to undertake that survey. So
Yes,
if an accident like that happened, then you're covered for it.
Yes, I'd hope so anyway.
Do you undertake any? I mean, we're obviously focusing on bats. Do you do any other kind of surveying?
Yeah, I'm a protected species ecologist, really. So I survey for.
Back onto the Bigfoot again.
I survey badgers,
survey.
Bigfoot survey. Yeah.
bats,
Okay, sorry.
great crested newts, dormice, reptiles.
So if someone's got a crocodile in their loft.
Yeah, I sort of do the occasional otter survey as part of some
I imagine that's very interesting.
waterfalls. Yeah, pretty much if it's protected under law, and it's a mammal or amphibian reptile, I survey.
So how
for
does
it.
that work for you working as an ecologist? I'm taking it that must be quite seasonal.
Yes, usually survey season is sort of March to September. There's some surveys you can do over winter, which is sort of more sort of the phase 1 and scoping, which is more sort of plant surveys and looking for sort of like burrows and things. I mean, you probably wouldn't see a lot of field signs. Certainly water vole, the field signs are sort of more obvious in sort of June, July sort of breeding season, because reptiles hibernate. So I sort of work 7 months of the year and then
Okay,
4 months off.
So for somebody who's been listening to all the wonderful information that you've been giving us during this episode, if somebody was interested in observing bats, maybe they've never decided to take a gander in their garden because they're too busy usually watching EastEnders or something in the evening, or they don't want to get out of bed earlier, what advice would you say to enjoy observing bats? What's the best thing they can do?
Certainly get in touch with a local bat group. A lot of them do sort of bat walks and things where you can go out with somebody that knows what they're doing. They'll have bat detectors and
Know what to look for.
to look for, and they can sort of talk you through sort of peak frequencies of bats and what they're picking up. And, so
I didn't know there were such things as bat groups. Are they quite a common thing? Or?
Yeah, most counties will have a bat group.
So if you basically Googled on the internet for your local bat group, then something's going to pop up.
Yeah. I mean, wildlife trusts will probably do bat walks as well. They certainly have a lot of information on bats on their website. If you're looking for sort of general information on bats and buildings, or trees, or more information about various species, the Bat Conservation Trust website has a lot
And
of
if you wanted to
information.
encourage bats, that's not a bad thing. You can put bat boxes up, and that's not against the law or anything.
No, it's fine to put bat boxes up. Like I say, sort of 3 meters off the ground, and then sort of south to southeast facing.
So could that be on a building and a tree as well?
Yeah. Bat boxes.
Or is it
can
more
go on
recommended to
either.
go on a tree?
I would recommend sort of the slightly more expensive woodcrete boxes because they last longer than the
So what's that? Woodcrete.
woodcrete. So it's sort of wood sawdust mixed in with concrete.
Right.
So they last longer than wooden boxes. I mean, but you can find plenty of designs for building wooden bat boxes if that's what you want to do.
Bats are a fascinating subject.
Yeah, and I think BCT also have sort of information on planting for bats to encourage night flying insects to the garden for the bats to feed on.
Just trying to think of other questions. To probably round it off now, but you do say that bats are the only true flying mammals.
Yes.
I mean, there are other mammals that do kind of glide and things, aren't there?
Yes.
Isn't there a flying squirrel or something?
Yeah, flying squirrels,
I
sugar
think that's more
gliders.
like
They've got a membrane.
Yeah, they've got sort of folds of skin between the legs that they use to
jump
glide
and glide and
yes.
then land. So they've got to go from up and then glide downwards type of thing, yeah?
Yes.
Right. Okay, but otherwise, apart from that, bats are the only flying mammal
Yes.
on the planet.
And very cute.
And very cute. Right, well, we've come to that time where we are going to... So, Sarah, you're not obviously used to this point, but when we have a special guest in, we like to hit them with our 6-shooter quickfire questions.
Okay.
6 questions off the bat. Off the bat. I didn't realise I was going to say that. But anyway, and you're happy to join in with this?
Yeah.
Okay, so this quick fire, so think as quick as you can, and we're going to hit you with these. So, question number 1. What's your favourite species of bat?
I like the pipistrelles because they eat lots of midges, and yeah, I usually get eaten alive by midges.
Okay,
So-
question 2. What's your favourite time to observe bats, dusk or dawn?
I like dawn surveys. I'm weird. I like being up at 2 o'clock in the morning.
Question 3. What's your favourite movie that has bats in it? Think.
I do like the Batman movies.
Batman.
As a kid, Batfink.
Batfink.
Not that he had movies.
My
but
wings
cartoons.
are a shield of steel.
Pretty sure he was a horseshoe bat.
Okay.
By the way.
Oh, by the way, so Batfink, if you've ever wondered, Batfink, we've heard it now, was a horseshoe bat. Okay, question 4. If you could go anywhere in the world to observe bats, where would it be?
Preferably not South America.
Gigantic mega bats.
I don't think you really need to observe
Well,
those.
Probably just stay in the UK. We've got, lots of interesting species. Probably sort of head down West Coast.
West Coast.
Sort of Southwest, try and see some horseshoes, which would be nice.
Okay. If, unfortunately, you passed away, what animal would you come back as?
Wolf.
Wolf.
Nice.
I wondered. I had to ask the question. I wondered if she wanted to come back as a bat. As a wolf.
It's a close call, but yeah.
Bat wolf. Do they have like that flying fox? Flying wolf.
Crikey.
Yeah.
Is it Varan?
That's it.
What they call it? Zach will know what I'm talking about. It's like a flying wolf thing.
Flying wolf. Okay. Last question. Batman or Dracula?
Batman.
Okay. Nice. Finish off with that.
There is actually a film, Dracula versus Batman.
There is actually, isn't there? I just wondered, Batman, Dracula. Superb. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you in. You have basically given us so much information.
Yes.
I've learned so much about this subject tonight that I didn't know.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I've learned so much. Yeah.
Hopefully the listeners have picked some stuff up again. And,
I can't believe how small bats are.
Yeah, I know.
It's common perception that bats are like
Going
big,
to slap you in the face like a face hugger from Aliens, and wrap their wings around your face.
I think that's because most zoos, their bats are sort of the mega bats rather than...
Yeah.
So you try and tell me
species.
when we were watching Dracula films with Christopher Lee, and there was a bat on a string. That Transylvania that don't have bats that big.
Probably wouldn't actually. I think most of the
No,
bats
it would have
all
been. It's all a lie.
Yes.
My whole childhood watching horror movies late on a Saturday night.
Another.
And it wouldn't have been that impressive if it had been this tiny little thing. Mind you, in the horror movies they squeak as well, don't they?
Yes.
Do you actually hear bats squeaking?
Some people can hear sort of the social calls and the nocturnes because they are at the top of range of the human hearing, but most
So,
are.
If vampire bats were a
ultrasonic.
real thing, like I'm talking vampire bats, not
Yeah.
vampire bats, you wouldn't hear one sneaking up on you, would you?
Probably not. No.
There you go.
That's even more terrifying.
So you don't want to cross a vampire bat with a flying fox, then.
Oh, blimey.
Then you've had it.
Yeah.
There'd be poor old Sarah being carried away into the distance. Well. Anyway, it's been absolutely brilliant.
Yes.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for coming in. And
Thank you to Adam as well for
thank you for
contributing.
Adam for contributing and being a second special guest.
Yes, of sorts. Yeah, our first dead guest. Anyway.
Yeah, I couldn't come in and talk about bats without bringing a bat to show you.
Exactly,
so,
yeah. If you enjoyed this podcast, please like and subscribe to this channel and comment below any suggestions of topics or activities you'd like to listen to in future episodes.
So that's a big batty goodbye from Buzz.
That's a bat goodbye from Jack. I couldn't think of anything.
I can't think of anything goodbye that's bat related, but thank you very much for having me.
Goodbye from
and,
Sarah. Oh, and
And a flappy goodbye from Zach.
flappy goodbye from Zach.
I don't know how I like about that.
Zach's
Flappy goodbye.
flappy. Oh God, no.
Anyway,
That doesn't work at all. On that note,
wings, okay? It's the wings.
on that note, now you know show.
Now we know.
Now we know.
Now we know.
Show.
Now we know
We
show.
still haven't worked out about bats. Da, da, da.